Welcome back. Again, Russ Paulson, Chief Operating Officer at Us Against Alzheimer's. TV, plays, movies, books, they're all forces in our society that can help shape public understanding and attitudes about this disease and do what's really critical, reducing stigma, breaking down barriers. It wasn't that long ago it would have been unimaginable to have a gay character on a television show. And one of the last barriers to be broken down was having somebody with Alzheimer's or dementia. We heard from Mandy Moore last night, star of This Is Us, who is a character who has dementia. And it follows her and her family through this journey. Well, today we're going to talk to an all-star panel of artists who are passionate about this disease and their advocacy. They'll share their personal experiences, reflect on how they've created art, used art to help society better understand the disease, and to improve the lives of those living with dementia and their family. Lauren Miller Rogen, who joined us last year at our gala, screenwriter, director, producer, co-founder of HFC, will moderate this conversation.
Hello, and welcome to the Us Against Alzheimer's 2020 Summit. This session is called Edutainment and Alzheimer's, Utilizing the Arts to Combat Alzheimer's. The arts and entertainment play a powerful role in educating people about a disease that is still so widely misunderstood. For me and all artists in different mediums, it's a way to share our personal stories and honor our loved ones who have had Alzheimer's. For those that don't know me, I'm Lauren Miller Rogen. I'm a screenwriter, director, producer whose life has been touched by Alzheimer's. In 2012, my mom was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease at 55 years old. After that, I co-founded HFC to activate the next generation of Alzheimer's advocates. Since then, HFC has raised over $12 million and awarded over 290,000 hours of in-home care to families, all while using humor and hope to engage people. In my real life, I've written, produced, and sometimes acted in film and TV projects such as For a Good Time Call, and most recently wrote and directed a film for Netflix called Like Father, in which Kelsey Grammer plays a man who's recently lost his best friend to Alzheimer's. Playwright Garrett Davis's mission to educate and advocate with laughter is making an impact in audiences across the nation with his touring performance arts series. His outreach, advocacy, and awareness regarding Alzheimer's disease has led to successful partnerships with Us Against Alzheimer's, Emory Hospital's Brain Center, and AstraZeneca, collaborations that allow him to reach more people and make a difference in people's lives. Anna Golja is a Canadian-born actress, singer, producer, and dancer. Anna has played a variety of roles in a number of film and TV projects, including The Fanatic, the inspirational sport drama Full Out, and Emmy-nominated drama Degrassi. Most recently, Anna decided to take on the role of producer as well as lead actress in The Cuban. The Cuban tells a beautiful story about a nurse who befriends an Alzheimer's patient who tells her of his past as a Cuban musician. The film won the Audience Award for Best Narrative Feature at the Los Angeles Pan-African Film Festival, and Anna also received the Best Actress Award at ICFF, Canada's Lavazza Film Festival for her portrayal of Mina. Kimberly Williams-Paisley has been starring in film and television and theater for over 25 years and is the New York Times best-selling author of Where the Light Gets In, the story of her mother's struggle with dementia. Miss Williams-Paisley began her career with the film Father of the Bride, and throughout the years, she has entertained us in movies and TV shows such as Father of the Bride Part 2, According to Jim, the Hallmark series Darrow and Darrow Mysteries, and most recently in the Christmas Chronicles and Jolene, both for Netflix. Ms. Williams-Paisley is a spokesperson and advocate for the Alzheimer's Association, for which she hosts an annual fundraiser. Additionally, she and her husband, Brad Paisley, started a nonprofit organization called The Store, which aims to empower low-income families in the Nashville area with a free grocery store. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And thank you to our speakers for giving so much of yourselves to change the course of Alzheimer's disease. We're going to start with questions from our speakers, then we'll take questions from our viewers. So feel free to type anything into the chat box at any time, and we'll get to that in the later part of our session. But first, we're going to dive in and have a conversation amongst us. So let's start with saying we all know that Alzheimer's is a disease that has a terrifying stigma around it and has had that stigma for too many years. People who had the disease or cared for their loved ones with the disease often stayed quiet. They did not share their stories. But that only adds to the stigma, and fortunately, These days, more and more people are talking about their experiences, showing that not only can you live with Alzheimer's, but you can thrive with it. And of course, when we share our stories, we make others feel less alone. We make others feel less scared. And perhaps most importantly, we can educate. Alzheimer's is a complicated disease. It's so much more than forgotten car keys. But without stories, without TV shows and plays and films and books which depict the disease in an accurate way, it would remain misunderstood. That's why I'm so thrilled to dive in and have this conversation with these wonderful humans about how and why we share these stories. So, Anna, let's start with you. But of course, we should all chime in at any time. This is a conversation. We don't need it to be so formal. But Anna, let's start with your film, The Cuban, which so beautifully depicts Louis Gossett Jr. as a former musician who has Alzheimer's. Can you tell us a bit about your film and why you chose to tell this story in the way that you did?
Yeah, absolutely. So the initial seed of an idea came to me when, my great grandmother was struggling with Alzheimer's, and she still is. She's alive and well at 93 years old. But I was noticing firsthand how music just completely brought her back to life and made her a lot more social and engaging. And my business partner was going through struggles and always wished that he had spent more time with his grandparent before they passed. So we kind of came together and we wanted to put some love and goodness in the world. So we came up with this pathetic pitch for a short film and got a director and screenwriter involved. And then it kind of just snowballed from there. But the film is about a pre-med student named Mina, played by me, and her first job in a nursing home, where she is given the task of taking care of this enigmatic patient with Alzheimer's and various forms of dementia. And through their relationship, she realizes that music really brings them back to life. So she uses music therapy to get these moments of lucidity and build a beautiful relationship.
That's so wonderful. And we'll come back to some of this, but I'm just curious, how has it been received so far? People, I'm sure, watching this message, I know they're very touched by it. How has the portrayal of Alzheimer's in your film been received?
I'm so glad that it's been received really well. We put in a lot of work to make sure that we were being as accurate as possible with the way that we depicted the disease. And we had researchers from the Baycrest Foundation here in Toronto, as well as various Alzheimer's organizations. I did caregiver training programs to make sure that my performance was as realistic as possible. So we really did our homework, and we're thrilled with the responses that we've been getting. Lots of stories on Twitter, on Instagram, from people who have loved ones with dementia, and it's amazing that we're able to tell this story and make a positive impact in people's lives.
That's so wonderful. Thank you so much for making that film. Garrett, I'm going to come over to you. So much of HFC, our foundation, our funding comes from comedy shows that we throw. And of course, when you think Alzheimer's, you're not necessarily thinking comedy, but something we learned is that sometimes you almost have to trick people into learning by entertaining them in whatever way feels organic to you. And so I'm curious about your journey in making the decision to use plays to educate people, and of course, what that journey has been like and how your work is received.
It started off being therapy at first, because when my grandmother died from Alzheimer's disease, it devastated me, Lauren. I wanted to know why. I wanted to know, there's a lot of questions I wanted answers to, and I just didn't. And I became an advocate with the Alzheimer's Association, and then led to Us Against Alzheimer's, and meeting, George Vredenberg and what they wanted to do. And so it was therapy at first, but then I saw the power of people coming up after the play was over, saying, I saw myself on that stage. I went through that situation, and it began to show me how the power of a theatrical performance could really be used to enlighten, educate, inspire, and provide hope. And from those conversations after the play, I began to kind of broaden the play more about, well, maybe let me educate about clinical trials. And so what happens with a theatrical performance, from my opinion, it allows people to see themselves on stage. It allows people to say, you know what, when I go back home, let me handle this a little bit differently. It gives them feedback in terms of, let me talk to my family about this. And so it's been received very well. Forgive Me Not has been running for 11 consecutive years. We are looking at trying to make it into a film. So it's been received very well, and hopefully one day it won't be as needed as much because we'll have a cure for Alzheimer's. But until then, I plan to do as much as I can to kind of keep it out there.
That's so amazing. Thank you. All right, Kim, you're up. Something that you and I have talked about is how there can still be so much joy shared with your loved one who has Alzheimer's. As you shared in your book, you and your mom had a lot of laughs as her journey went on. And of course, that's not what we would expect with a disease like this. You shared so much of your story in your book, and I was hoping you could sort of share your experience of really sharing the reality of what your family went through, not really in a fictionalized way, and what that experience has been like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you talked about at first about stigma, and that was a huge part of our journey, unfortunately, is my mom was diagnosed in 2005, 2006. And the first thing she said to all of us was, do not tell anybody. Don't even tell other doctors. I don't want another opinion. I don't want my friends to know. So we had to hide. And unfortunately, we were so isolated. It's already such an isolated disease and an illness, and can be so isolating for caregivers. And so we missed out on so many resources. And when I wrote the book, it really helped me to discover, it was like Garrett said, it was like therapy for me. It helped me to understand what really happened. As I looked back, I wrote it when my mom was still alive. But one of the things I talked about was finding that joy in the new mom, and sort of finding a level of acceptance in who she was becoming, and even finding delight in that. I mean, there was so much tragedy involved in the story, but I didn't want that to be the end of the story. I wanted to find the silver lining. And one of the things we found was that my mom had always loved people, and that part didn't go away. And there she was in long-term care residence, and she was still completely light up when someone walked in the room. And she may not have been able to say my name or even maybe know that I was her daughter, but she still would delight when I'd walk in the room. And being able to find that joy, and similar to what Anna said, finding joy in music was huge for my mom. She still could have a party, even when she was in the state that she was in. So I tried to focus on those moments in the book, and highlight that there are beautiful lessons and beautiful things that can come from something as horrible as Alzheimer's.
Yeah, totally. I don't want to focus too much on it, but I thought we should all as artists sort of talk about the struggle in that, and then in the
1 o'clock
that surrounds it. And it's 1 o'clock, everyone. But it's always interesting when you set out to tell a story about someone who has Alzheimer's, because the moments aren't always so beautiful and full of joy. And I personally, I'll share that I've been working on a documentary for a while about my family story with Alzheimer's. And we recently tried to get some distribution for it, and we actually struck out. I think partly because it's a pretty graphic look at the ugly shit that happens with the disease. And I think that some of the response we've gotten is people are kind of uncomfortable with it. And we're reworking it, and we try to add hope into it, because there is a lot of hope that I think the three of us have certainly found in storytelling. But I'm curious if the three of you have ever received any sort of pushback about sharing too much that was too sad or too upsetting, and what how you navigated those situations.
I received a little pushback. This whole Forgive Me Not process was written because of my grandmother. But here I am, 10 years, 11 years after doing Forgive Me Not, my mother has Alzheimer's disease. And as I would go around the country talking about my grandmother, the question became, are you going to talk about your mother? I mean, yes, because, the thing that we have in common, those of us that are on Zoom, we have stories that need to be told. And there are people that are looking at this that have similar stories. I encourage and challenge you to tell your story. Whether you get a movie deal, a playwright deal, a book deal, that's not the important thing. The important thing is telling your story. Alzheimer's disease is a disease that strips you of your dignity. Don't let it strip you of what you should do. And what you should do is tell your story, because you never know who's looking at you and you're going to give inspiration to, and you're going to inspire and give hope to. Is if you hide it, that does not help Alzheimer's wins.
Yeah, gosh, absolutely. I know in the early years, as we touched on, my mom did not want me talking about her illness either. And that was really hard for me. As a storyteller, I share my experience. And as an artist, I've always expressed my feelings in an outward way. And keeping it inside, really, honestly, it hurt me physically. Like I was in such a dark, scared place all the time until I started sharing my experience. And felt suddenly realizing that I was not alone, because other people were sharing their stories and they were hearing mine, which inspired them to tell theirs, and so on and so on and so on. Has anyone else ever faced that, where you were afraid to tell your story and then suddenly you just sort of broke the seal and was like, all right, I'm just going to let it all out there?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, my mom really didn't want us to, so I felt like I was going against my mom's wishes, which was really hard.
Sure.
But and I would even feel like I went ahead and told my friends anyway. But I could see when people would kind of glaze over. It was just like sometimes it was too much information. But that's why I was so glad once I started telling my story and I connected with the Alzheimer's Association and connected with this community of people who've been through it, like yourselves, who it's easier to talk to people who've been through it. So once you start telling your story, then those people come out of the woodworks and they say, people have said to me still, thank you so much for telling your story because I feel less alone. And then we share stories and we see what we have in common. And it is so important to do that with this. And we've talked about, you meet one person with Alzheimer's, you've met one person with Alzheimer's, and that every patient is different, every story is different. So there are so many things that we can share about what we've learned in different aspects of the disease and caregiving.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just curious, as you've started to show this movie, I know the current situation has sort of changed probably the way you released this film and how you're getting it out there. But as you've started showing it to people, I'm just curious, sort of more just about the reaction that people have, shown as far as, seeing someone like Louis Gossett Jr., who is, as we know, such, this strong man, and what has the response been to seeing him, with this disease in your film?
Well, it's been exactly what Kimberly was saying. People just really relating to the story and looking to the film as an inspiration. A lot of people still don't know that music can bring patients back to life, even if it's just for a moment. But that moment can mean so much and can have such a huge impact on the people around that patient. So it's the reaction has been amazing. Louis did an incredible job. Every day was like a masterclass working with him. And so I'm so grateful that the response has been overwhelmingly positive and people just really relate to it. It's that's why we're in the arts. We want to connect with people and make an impact on their lives.
Yeah. I'm curious, any of you. So in our work, like I said, we do comedy shows to raise money for Alzheimer's, and we do other programs which are much more serious and related, but comedy and Alzheimer's don't necessarily go together. So we've, brought in people who truly don't know anything about the disease. They come to our events or some of our programs with, the fortunate, life story of never having known someone with Alzheimer's. And I always find that people have the response of like, oh my, I had no idea. When we would show our documentary, a lot of people, the response afterwards, they would say, I had no idea it was like this. Oh my God. And in your experience, the three of you, feel free to jump in. Have you felt like you have really, opened the eyes of people who don't know? The three of us have lived it. We've all experienced it personally, but there are people out there who haven't. And what has your experience been like, to someone who comes to your work as a clean slate, we'll call it? How do you see people being affected by that? I've stumped you all.
I find that people don't read my book unless they have Alzheimer's in their family or they're in that situation. So I really admire and thank you for the work that you're doing in bringing people in to learn about it when they haven't experienced it. I think that is a gift. And I think it's hard to get listening ears. It's hard to get people to be interested if they haven't experienced it personally. That's my own experience.
Yeah. Garrett, do you find that most people who come to see your work have experience, or do you find that people just come as a way of hearing, oh, I heard this was moving and emotional and beautiful, and oh my God, I learned so much, I had no idea?
Yeah, well, what we do is we kind of do it backwards. We don't advertise that it's an Alzheimer's play. We don't want, because, I think it's important that we be culturally sensitive in everything that we give out. Meaning, if I'm taking care of my mother who has Alzheimer's, the last thing I want to do is go see an Alzheimer's play.
Right.
But if I go see a play and I learn something about Alzheimer's, now I'm more inept to pick up that magazine when I take mom to the doctor about Alzheimer's, or call the Alzheimer's Association. I think, if I'm coming to be entertained is one thing, but if I come to be entertained and while I'm entertained, I learn more about it, I think that's been the effective way that we have used it.
Yeah.
That's exactly the same even with us, Garrett. As far as marketing the film, we haven't been marketing it as an Alzheimer's movie, like a disease movie, because of course there is still a stigma attached to it. So rather than focusing on the disease, we've been marketing it with the musical element and the element of bringing back memories and building beautiful relationships with our elders and cherishing them and respecting them and listening to their stories, because the stigma is real. But if we can tell an entertaining story while still educating people, I think that's the sweet spot.
Yeah. I think that I've learned, we sort of touched on this earlier, but it is such a dark disease, but there are so many moments of light throughout it. And, I think that, even if we have to, as I use the word, trick people and bring them in, it's worth it, because this is reality, right? Like, this is something that has touched all of us. And I know in my work, it's through, connecting with other people that has given me the hope that I didn't have early on. And knowing, how much you can live life with the disease and while you are caring for someone with this disease. I want to switch over real quick. As we know, Alzheimer's is a disease that disproportionately affects people of color. And this for Anna and Garrett. I'm just curious if we could touch on real quickly, how do the Cuban and Forget-Me-Not address this issue that also affects Alzheimer's disease? And what kind of impact can storytelling have in the area of, really highlighting the disproportionate effect on people of color?
Well, with the Cuban, we didn't intentionally choose to make Luis an Afro-Cuban character because of that reason. In fact, we didn't even know that when we were developing the film. We chose Afro-Cuban because we found that there is a large diaspora of Cubans living in Toronto. But as we were doing research, we did find that, and we realized that we had something very special and very unique, because you don't really see the stories of colored people living with Alzheimer's. And actually, when we were at the Pan-African Film Festival in LA, the astounding amount of people who came up to us to tell us that, they really related to Luis and his experience, and that it was so rare for them to see somebody that they identified with so deeply on screen it was just so shocking to me. But again, it film and the arts in general really has this power to educate and inform. So it's been a very rewarding experience.
Yeah, like Anna said, it's been a very rewarding experience, because the arts does have a power to educate. And the thing that bothered me is when I started researching about Alzheimer's disease and found out that African Americans are twice as likely to get Alzheimer's disease, then I did my own personal polls. I would go around, I would ask, African Americans, if you had Alzheimer's, would you know where to go get help? And they would know. And that would bother me so much. It always felt, and I took it personal, that how could this disease that affects a community so much, but then you have, that community, they don't know where to go get help. They're not educated about it. And not to say that no one isn't doing a good job, but I took it upon myself. I wanted to do my fair share to educate. And so by writing those pieces and putting those scenes in, you can't talk to an African American about a clinical trial without the word Tuskegee coming up. That's the elephant in the room. And so having those conversations and having those scenes on stage that deal with Tuskegee, it got the elephant out the room, and it started making a certain community understand how important a clinical trial is. You don't go to Walmart and get a pill without that pill going through a clinical trial. That's why so many different people take so many different medicines for the same headache, whether it's Anacin, Bayer, Goody, Potter, Aleve. And we have to make sure that we as artists are doing our part to use that platform to educate our people so they can have a better quality of life.
Yeah, thank you. That's such important work. Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for highlighting those really important issues that still surround the disease. Okay, so we're going to switch a little bit. So for people living with dementia, as we've talked about, creating art can be so important for maintaining quality of life. And of course, coping with and expressing the experience of living with the disease. So I want to introduce you to Reverend Cynthia Huling-Hummel, who has early onset Alzheimer's, and she created a series of masks. I think we're going to cut to.
Hi, everybody. I'm Reverend Dr. Cynthia Huling-Hummel from Elmira, New York. I'm a retired Presbyterian pastor living with early stage Alzheimer's, but I'm also an Alzheimer's advocate, I'm an author, and I'm an artist. In 2017, I was part of a project called Art Reflects at the Community Arts of Elmira, where we were invited as people living with dementia to create a mask, and I decided to create a mask that reflected what it felt like to live with dementia. But I couldn't stop with just one mask. I created 35 more. And then I took pictures of them and I wrote stories about each of the masks. And then I put them together and compiled them in this book called Unmasking Alzheimer's. Last summer, 10 of my masks were on display at the National Gallery of Art in Stockholm, Sweden, as part of the Dementia 10 conference. I'd like to tell you about just one of my masks, and that's this one. It's called Love Remembers. No matter how my dementia progresses and no matter who I forget, faces and names and loved ones, I do believe that my heart will remember our love. Thank you for joining me today and have a wonderful conference. God bless you all.
Okay, I think we're back. Hi, everyone. That was so lovely. Okay, so we have some questions from our viewers that we'll dive in here. So what triggered your decision from keeping quiet about Alzheimer's in your family to telling everyone? Does anyone want to take that? I can also take it. I'll go. So for me, it's my mom, we sort of touched on it. She had a lot of her own stigma about the disease. Both of her parents had Alzheimer's, and I think that she was so afraid of what her life was going to be like, but she told me she was more afraid for us, which was, really representative of who she was. And she felt very strongly about not telling anyone because she felt embarrassed. And I kept telling her there was nothing to be embarrassed about. And there was this message over and over again, and sort of like Kim's touched on earlier, for me, I just couldn't keep it in anymore. And I started with friends. And then, my mom was too advanced at that point to know. And then I just sort of made the decision that who my mom was, she wouldn't have kept quiet about it. She would have wanted me to do something about it. She would have wanted me to shout it as loud as I possibly could so that I could change it if I could, for her, for us, for the future, for anyone. And so I found strength in knowing who she really was and decided to listen to that. And that's why I personally started sharing my story.
Yeah, Lauren, I had a similar moment like that when my mother was an amazing fundraiser for the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research. And so she went around talking to people and telling them about Parkinson's and helping convince them that this was something worthwhile to care about and to raise money. And so now as I'm fundraising and I'm telling my mother's story without ever having gotten her permission, I do think a lot about who she used to be. And that she's there, you know, she's since passed on, but I do feel like she's there cheering me on and saying, yes, this is who I raised you to be. And so I take a lot of comfort in that, even though I never got her actual blessing to tell her story. But it's been so healing for me and for so many people. So I know she wouldn't argue with that.
I know, same, right? Like, I feel like my mom would be right here next to me if she could. And, you know, and like she was someone who always spoke up for the injustices that she felt and saw around her. So I actually reached a point where I felt so good about sharing it because I knew that she would want that.
Yeah.
So yeah, okay. Another question we have here. As a person who is living with this disease, I appreciate in you sharing your stories, but I'm bothered that we don't share stories by those who are not famous or don't have money. Those stories would show so much struggle. How can we get those stories out?
Absolutely agree with that. I'm just amazed at the people that I have met, people who have the disease that come out to events and to fundraisers and often stand up and speak about it, and they aren't well known. And I love hearing their stories. And I think it's so important for people with this disease to be open and honest about it so that people can see what the face of the disease looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'll say this, that, you know, I think that so much of the work that we do at HFC is trying to get everyone to share their story. And we provide space on our website and on our social media for individuals to share their stories. Because you're right, seeing people that you can't relate to in real life doesn't provide a whole lot of comfort all the time. And so you want to be represented out there by people who are, you know, feel true to your story. I'm curious, Garrett and Anna, not to put you on the spot, do you have anything to add about, you know, really making sure that we are showing the real side of Alzheimer's and not just a, you know, movie version of it?
I think this is where, you know, our responsibility as storytellers, you know, there's a lot of weight on our shoulders to tell these stories in the most accurate and authentic way possible. And so, you know, we did our due diligence of getting all the researchers on board, making sure that, you know, we're not glamorizing it in any way. Like, we really do see the harsh reality of living with the disease and how it affects people, you know, around that person. So yeah, I think there's a lot of weight on our shoulders, and it's up to us to tell all these stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you know, and we'll continue trying to normalize the disease. I think that's something that, you know, for me as a filmmaker, we really try to normalize it. You know, in Like Father, the Alzheimer's storyline wasn't a huge part of it. It was Kelsey Grammer's backstory, and it was revealed later on in the story that he was bankrupt because he had spent all of his money taking care of his best friend who had Alzheimer's. And that is certainly something that I think, you know, a lot of people can relate to, because Alzheimer's is a extremely costly disease. To care for someone requires an extraordinary amount of strength and finances that most people don't have. And so it is so important to highlight that, the reality of the disease. Absolutely. Another question. I loved seeing the video from Cynthia Huling-Hummel. Can Anna talk about Lou Gossett's character and his connection to music?
Absolutely. So with Luis in The Cuban, we see music literally bring him back to life. You know, my character Mina notices a Benny Moré poster on his wall, and that's kind of what makes her start humming these old Cuban songs. And once she does that, she realizes the effect it has on him. So she takes it a step further and starts playing him records, and then brings in Cuban food and breaks all of the rules in caregiving, but all in an effort to bring him back to life. And when she does that, there are so many moments where he actually regains his ability to play the guitar. And she learns that Luis was a famous musician back in Cuba, and he had this long lost love. And you discover all of the layers of this human being. And if it weren't for music, she wouldn't know anything about his story. So yeah, music is Luis, and you see it in so many different ways in the film.
Yeah, it's so special. Someone else has asked, my question, as an artist with your own personal experience, what is the thing that surprised you the most about your journey? I'll just say this, for me personally, I mean, I was so young when my mom was diagnosed. I was in my early 20s. And so, I was very immature and thought for sure I was the only person, and I was the youngest, and I was just the worst. It was just the worst. And of course, I think what has, in sharing my story has, pleasantly surprised me over the years is that unfortunately, but fortunately for me, I'm so far from alone. And that has been a very, I don't want to say I'm happy that I'm not alone, because I'm not happy that other people experience this, but it has brought great comfort. And so that has actually been the most wonderful surprise. I'm not surprised that people are uncomfortable sometimes around it. That is the reality of it. And I think that the challenge is to keep fighting against that discomfort, to keep finding more understanding with each other, because that's the way we learn. Anyone else surprised by anything along their journey? Garrett, you just came back in the middle of that question. We were just, we had a question about if you were ever surprised by something along your journey and being a storyteller, but with Alzheimer's, was there anything surprising that has happened? Oh,
is he
seems like
muted?
we're not hearing Garrett, unfortunately. Oh no. Whatever he's saying, I'm sure is so smart and intelligent too.
Well, then until we get his audio back, I'll just jump in.
Yeah.
Oh geez, I lost the question in my brain. Could you repeat it?
Just if you,
what was surprising? That's right.
Have you had pleasant or unpleasant, I suppose, this is reality, surprises?
So throughout the process, we were learning that the amount of funding that goes towards Alzheimer's is nothing compared to, stroke and cancers and, everything else. It's not a, for a lack of a better term, it's not a sexy disease. But it really is astonishing that all of these other diseases have so much funding, and yet Alzheimer's, that affects, I don't know what the exact statistics are, but probably more people, doesn't get any funding. So it really is heartbreaking. And I think that just brings us back to awareness and people like us and people in more powerful positions to inform and get the conversation started and do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. The funding thing is something that is so interesting. When we started talking about Alzheimer's in 2012, Alzheimer's was getting like, $600,000 a year, something like that from the government. Now, thanks to organizations like Us Against Alzheimer's, who are so good at pushing the stupid government, of course, funding has increased greatly, which is so wonderful, but it's still not enough. Not nearly enough. And that's why it's so important. Another question we have, which I'm curious, does anyone have any films or TV shows or characters from stories or books that you felt that you were particularly touched by, who had dementia and, sort of inspired your own decision to tell your story? I'll say this, I'll start with saying, until recently, I wasn't always thrilled with how Alzheimer's was portrayed. I feel like things were sort of sugar-coated. And I feel like recently people are really starting to share, the good, bad, and the ugly with the disease. And that's been so wonderful. I think Still Alice really sort of, broke the seal on the reality of this disease in such a beautiful and touching way. And I'm excited by, of course, Anna, your work, I mean, all of your work, obviously, because I think it's, again, it's putting the reality out there, which sometimes is full of hope and full of energy. And sometimes it's not, sometimes it's sad. And that's, so important to portray. So for me, I would think, Still Alice was very inspiring, of course, as sort of one of the first films.
Yeah, Still Alice really inspired me. Oh, sorry, Anna.
No, go ahead, Kimberly.
Still Alice really inspired me as well, but I also wanted part 2 because I felt like where Still Alice ended, it was like, well, that's where it really gets tricky. So let's talk about what happens when the husband leaves and the daughter is the caregiver, and now what? And so I would love to see. But again, it's like what we were saying earlier is you have to give them a little bit of sugar, and that's when the story is getting really challenging. So maybe that's why they had to stop there. But I would love to see more stories like that.
Absolutely. I think we just lost Garrett again. Hopefully we'll get him back. Oh, he's back.
There he is.
Connected to audio. Garrett, do you hear us?
Oh,
I don't hear you.
Oh no.
Can't hear you.
Again, he's saying such important things. I'm sad we're missing this. All right, well, he's still trying. Garrett, jump in at any time if you can. But just curious, the extra power, someone asked the extra power of documentaries in this genre. Like I touched on, we have a documentary that we are trying our very best to get out there. And hopefully we will find the right distributor for it. I think that, again, sort of what we just touched on, I think, we can tend to sugarcoat or sort of highlight the early parts of the disease, which again are wonderful. And it's important to show those aspects of the disease, but, also showing the later stages is important. So I personally think documentaries are so important, although difficult.
Exactly. The Glenn Campbell documentary I thought was really wonderful. They did a beautiful job with that one. And again, it's so brave to do something like that, to really bring the cameras in and show the real life of it is challenging, but so brave and so vital.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also alive inside, just bringing it back to the music. And that really is, it was one of the biggest inspirations for us while we were making The Cuban.
Yeah, that film, especially, I feel like so many people have seen that. It was really like a really major conversation starter, which I really appreciated with that story. Yeah. Does anyone have any future projects that are Alzheimer's related? I do. We've been working on an animated film about Alzheimer's based on a graphic novel about a young woman who lost her mom to Alzheimer's. So animated films take a while. So unfortunately, it'll probably be a few years before that one gets anywhere. But that's something that I'm excited about and working on.
That is awesome.
Wow, so cool.
Does anyone else have anything they want to plug before we wrap up?
Can you guys hear me?
Oh my God, you are.
I have no idea.
Before, I know we have to wrap up, but real quick, Garrett, I want to make sure, because you have so many smart, important things to share. I feel like we missed it. Is there any sort of parting wisdom you want to, just share with us about your experience before we go?
Real quickly, those that are listening, it's important that you share your story. It's not easy. I don't want you to look at us and listen to us and think that they can do it and I can't, because if you're in a church and you take mom to church and mom has Alzheimer's and mom gets up and embarrasses you, the one place you've been taking mom all your life, you don't want to go. This disease pushes you into seclusion. Push through that. Everybody needs somebody. It is important and imperative that you share your story, please.
Yeah, that's a perfect note to end on. Thank you. Thank you so much to our panelists for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your stories with everyone. Thank you for everyone who joined us and for asking questions. And as Garrett just said, remember that sharing your experience can greatly impact someone else's experience. And that, I truly believe, is the beginning of the end of Alzheimer's. So thank you so much for being here with us today. Share your story. Support Us Against Alzheimer's. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you so much, Lauren.